Hi, I'm Erica Collins, and for years I was treated like an afterthought in my own family. They showered my sister with love, money, and praise, while I was told I'd never measure up. When they cut me off completely, I stayed silent. What they didn't know was that I'd already planted a plan that would turn their so-called inheritance into ashes. Before we dive into this, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments where are you watching. From the lawyer's office felt cold, the kind of manufactured chill that sinks into your bones. The air smelled of old paper and the faint, expensive scent of the leather chairs. I sat across from my parents and my sister Claire, the silence broken only by the quiet tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. Each tick felt like a countdown. Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer for as long as I could remember, cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the still room. He held a stack of papers, his hands steady. This was it, the formal declaration of what I had known my entire life. Erica, my father started, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He wouldn't look me in the eye. Instead, he stared at a point on the wall just over my shoulder. We've decided that everything will go to your sister Claire. You get nothing. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, physical pain right in my chest. It felt like a door slamming shut. I watched my mother nod slowly, her hands twisting a pearl necklace at her throat. She looked at me, but her eyes were distant, as if she were looking at a stranger. There was no sadness, no apology, just a quiet, firm finality. It's better this way, Erica, she added, her voice a soft murmur that somehow made the words cut even deeper. At least she won't waste it. Waste it. The words echoed in my head. My entire life, my hard work, my independence, all of it dismissed as a waste. I glanced at Claire, my younger sister, who was sitting beside them, looking prim and perfect. As my mother spoke, a small, quick smirk played on Claire's lips. It was there for only a second, a fleeting moment of triumph, but I saw it. It was like a knife turning slowly in a wound that had never been allowed to heal. I felt frozen, pinned to the leather chair by the weight of their decision. Nothing. Waste it. My sister smirked. It all sank in, heavy and cold as stone. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just sat there, my hands balled into tight fists in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. It was a small, secret pain, one they couldn't see. No one else seemed to notice. To them, this was just business. To me, it was the end of a lifetime of trying. This feeling, this profound sense of being left out, wasn't new. It was the foundation upon which my childhood was built. It started with the small things. I remember Christmas mornings, the air, thick with the smell of pine needles and cinnamon. Claire always had a mountain of presents under the tree, wrapped in shimmering paper. My pile was always modest, a few small practical gifts. One year I opened a book on astronomy I had hinted at for months. She tore open the wrapping on a brand new bicycle, its red paint gleaming under the tree lights. I'd get a new sweater. She'd get a sprawling dollhouse. It was just the way things were, an unspoken rule of our family. Every Christmas, every birthday. My 9th birthday was a masterpiece of their neglect. I had fallen in love with a professional art set, the kind with dozens of colored pencils and charcoal sticks arranged in a wooden case. I had circled it in a catalog and left it on the kitchen table for weeks. On my birthday, my parents presented Claire with a new video game system she'd casually mentioned wanting. My gift was a small plastic box of crayons and a pad of paper. "You're so good at art, dear," my mother had said, patting my head. "You can make anything with these." The rest of the day was spent listening to the beeps and boops of Claire's new game, my crayons untouched. When I graduated from high school, I knew college was on me. I worked 2 jobs all summer, waitressing during the day and stocking shelves at a grocery store at night, to save up. I applied for every scholarship I could find and earned enough to cover my first year. I paid my own way through all 4 years, every single cent. My parents said they were proud, but it was a quiet, dismissive pride. It came in the form of a quick nod or a distracted, "That's nice, dear." When Claire graduated a few years later, they threw a massive party in her honor. They didn't just pay for her tuition, they rented her a fancy apartment near campus, co-signed for a new car, and gave her a credit card for essentials. which seemed to mostly include clothes and brunches with friends. Claire needs to focus on her studies, my mother would explain if anyone asked. Erica is just so independent. They said the word independent as if it were a flaw, a genetic defect I had that Claire was thankfully spared. They called it reckless. My choice to live on my own terms, to not ask for their help, was not respected. It was mocked. Claire was easy. Claire was perfect. She was their little princess, cushioned from the world. I was the one who had to try harder, the one who was always just a little bit less. I never complained out loud. What was the point? They wouldn't have listened. They never did. So I learned to rely on myself. I learned to be quiet. Weeks before that final meeting in the lawyer's office, the humiliation reached a new peak at a family dinner. It was at an expensive restaurant, the kind with white tablecloths and tiny artistic portions of food. Claire was glowing, soaking up the attention like a flower in the sun. "Oh, you should see the place, Erica," she chirped, talking about a vacation home their parents were buying for her. "Mom and Dad are giving it to me as an early graduation present. It's got a huge pool, and the view." She went on, describing every detail, while my parents nodded, beaming with pride. I waited for a lull in the conversation, wanting to contribute, to show them I was also doing well. "That sounds amazing, Claire," I said, forcing a smile. "I've actually been working really hard on this new investment strategy at my firm. It's a big project, and my boss thinks it could lead to a promotion." My father cut me off before I could finish. He didn't even look at me. His gaze was fixed on Claire, his perfect daughter. "You'll understand real assets when you have responsibilities, Erica," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "For now, just watch and learn." A ripple of laughter went around the table. My aunts and uncles, even some of my cousins, they all laughed. It was a light, cruel sound that made my face burn with shame. I felt like a child being scolded for speaking out of turn. Claire giggled, a delicate little sound, as she took a sip of her wine. She looked so pleased with herself. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my water in his face and tell them all about the responsibilities I managed every single day, the bills I paid, the career I was building from nothing. But I didn't. I just pushed the food around on my plate and retreated into silence. I watched them. I listened. And I stored it all away. Another cut. Another reason. Back in the lawyer's office, I could still feel the heat of that shame. Mr. Henderson droned on, listing the assets line by line. The family house, the savings accounts, the stock portfolio, the shares in my father's business. It was all going to Claire. My hands were still clenched under the table, my knuckles white. The initial shock was fading, replaced by something else. A cold, hard resolve was beginning to grow in its place. I looked at Claire, at her smug, entitled expression. She thought she had won. My parents looked relieved, as if a great burden had finally been lifted. The burden of me. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't say a single word. Not to them, anyway. But inside my head, a single word formed. A promise I made to myself. Noted. It was so quiet, a whisper in the storm of my thoughts. But I heard it, and I meant it. What my family never bothered to understand was how much I truly knew. They saw me as the quiet, reckless daughter, the one who wouldn't measure up. But my independence had forced me to be smarter, to be more strategic. I had been working in finance for years, and I was good at it. Very good. I understood how money worked, how businesses breathed, and how they could suffocate under the weight of ego and neglect. I had quietly studied my family's assets, not because I expected a piece of the pie, but because I was curious, and because, deep down, I knew I had to protect myself. My father's business, the one he paraded around like a trophy, wasn't as stable as he pretended. It was a tangled mess of old-fashioned practices, questionable bookkeeping, and hidden debts. I saw the red flags. I saw the weak spots he was too proud to admit existed. For years, I had carefully positioned my own investments, keeping them in a world completely separate from theirs. I built my own path, my own secure future, without a single cent of their help. It was a slow, deliberate process, like building a fortress, brick by brick, and they never saw it. They never even looked. They were too busy admiring Claire. After walking out of that cold office, I didn't waste any time on grief. I channeled all of it into action. I sold my small apartment, the only home that had ever felt truly mine. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I took that money, every last penny, and reinvested it. Not in the safe, slow-moving stocks my father favored. No, I put it into high-risk, high-reward tech startups, companies I had been tracking for years, ones that were poised to explode. It was a gamble, but I had done my homework. There was something else, too. Years ago, my father had been offered a chance to buy a large parcel of land far outside the city. It was undeveloped, wild, worthless land, he had scoffed. Only a fool would buy that. Claire had agreed, wrinkling her nose. Why would anyone want all that dirt? I had looked at the zoning maps, at the city's long-term expansion plans. I saw something different. I saw a future. Quietly, secretly, using money I had saved from a freelance project, I bought a small stake in the company that owned it. It took years, a long and patient game. But now, that worthless land was at the center of a new, massive commercial development. Property values were skyrocketing. My small, forgotten stake was growing into a fortune, and no one knew. No one but me. Months passed in silence. My family didn't contact me, and I didn't reach out. I was cut off, just as they wished. Then, the whispers started. Not from them, but through the tangled grapevine of family connections. A distant cousin called, her voice laced with concerned curiosity. An old family friend sent a vague, probing email. The whispers grew louder. Claire, I heard, was starting to panic. The family business, her grand inheritance, was suddenly under investigation for years of shady bookkeeping and tax missteps. The hidden debts my father had ignored for so long were finally coming to light. The estate's value, the very thing they had placed entirely in her hands, was shrinking. Drastically. I knew why. I knew exactly why. My quiet legal filings, my anonymous tips to regulatory agencies, my careful exposure of the loopholes he had exploited for years. It wasn't a direct attack. It was simpler than that. It was just bringing the truth into the light, forcing audits, making them face the fragile reality of what they had built, a house of cards, and a small, persistent breeze had begun to blow. I didn't feel joy, just a calm, quiet sense of justice, a rebalancing of the scales. Claire, ever the show-off, decided to throw an inheritance celebration. It was a party to mark her new status as the sole heir, the new owner of the Collins family business. An invitation arrived in my mailbox, a stiff, formal card. It was clearly sent out of obligation, a way to maintain appearances. But I decided to go. The party was at the family home, the house that was now legally Claire's. It was filled with people, their laughter and chatter echoing off the high ceilings. Claire stood in the center of the room, wearing an expensive dress, a glass of champagne in her hand. She was holding court, talking loudly about her plans for the business. "It's a lot of responsibility," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "But I'm ready for the challenge." My parents stood nearby, beaming at her. They saw me the moment I walked in. Their faces froze, a flicker of surprise and annoyance crossing their features. I made my way through the crowd. I smiled politely at Claire. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I brought you a little housewarming gift." I calmly placed a thin manila folder on the ornate table beside her. It wasn't large, but its contents were heavy with consequence. Claire looked at the folder, then at me, her perfect smile faltering. "What's this, Erica? Your resume?" she asked with a short laugh. She opened it. Inside were court documents, official audit reports, and notarized statements of debt. They laid out, in stark, undeniable numbers, the true value of her inheritance after the investigations and liens. Nearly nothing. Her face drained of all color. It was like watching a light bulb flicker and die. Her eyes scanned the papers, her mouth falling open slightly. She looked up at my parents, her eyes wide with panic. They had stopped talking to their guests. They were staring at the folder. My father rushed over and snatched the papers from her hand. His eyes widened as he read, his face turning a blotchy red. My mother let out a small, horrified gasp. "What is this, Erica?" my father demanded, his voice shaking with a rage that didn't scare me anymore. I stood tall. For the first time in my life, I felt taller than all of them. I looked at Claire, pale and speechless. I looked at my parents, suddenly aged and afraid. "You cut me off," I said, my voice calm but carrying across the now silent room. "You gave her everything. You thought you were punishing me, but you were just shielding her from reality. And now, everything you thought you had, everything you promised her, is dust." I looked directly at Claire. "I built my own life, brick by brick, in the real world. You were building illusions." My voice was steady. There was no anger, no bitterness, just the cold, clean weight of the truth. My revenge wasn't loud. It was silent. And it was complete. I left the party then. I didn't wait for their response. I just walked out into the cool night air and didn't look back. A few weeks later, I moved into my new home. It wasn't a sprawling mansion built on a shaky foundation of lies, but a clean, modern house with big windows and a view of the city. My house. Bought with the millions my independent investments had earned. The tech startups had soared. The worthless land had been sold for a profit that was beyond my wildest dreams. I had done it all, by myself. I sat at my new dining table, the morning sun streaming in. The quiet was peaceful. My life was finally my own, truly and completely. I whispered the words into the still air, a final acknowledgement of my journey. They thought cutting me off would destroy me. All it did was free me. If you've ever been dismissed, remember, sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. Drop a comment below and subscribe for more stories where betrayal meets justice.